Good afternoon and welcome to one and all present here, Dr. Gillian Dooley, Dr. Rajshri Trivedi, Dr. Joydeep Sarangi, all the faculty members of New Alipore College and Maniben Nanavati Women's College, and my dear participants who are tuning in from India and across the globe via Zoom meetings and Facebook Live. I wholeheartedly welcome all of you all for today's webinar titled Music in Jane Austen's Life and Works. My name is Vineta Rodrigues, and I'm the Assistant Professor at the Department of English at Maniben Nanavati Women's College, Mumbai, India. As Jane Austen rightly said in her novel Emma, without music, life would be a blank to me. We bring to you two things Jane Austen dearly loved, books and music. Without further ado, I would like to just proceed with the program. I would like to invite our dear principal and HOD of the English department of Maniben Nanavati Women's College, Dr. Rajshri Trivedi, to deliver the welcome address.
Thank you, Vineta. Am I audible?
Yes, ma'am.
And visible too?
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah. Well, a very warm welcome to Gillian. And last half an hour has made me quite friendly to her. I found her to be very warm. Jaideep has always been a long time friend. The teaching faculty from New Alipore College and my own college, Maniben Nanavati Women's College. And all the participants, a very warm welcome to you for this wonderful event, which is in collaboration with New Alipore College and Maniben Nanavati Women's College, Departments of English. It is a truth universally acknowledged that a single man in possession of a good fortune must be in want of a good wife. This was the beginning of the first lecture ever I attended as a young student of BA English Literature at St. Xavier's College, Ahmedabad. And Professor Saguna Ramanathan began her lecture with these lines, which are the beginning lines of Pride and Prejudice too. And that made the history in my life. Well, I would say that for the first time I realized that words can really play magic, but more than words, there is some hidden lyrical element, some hidden musical strain or a note, which you need to identify if you have an ear to listen to good music, rhythm, and good strains and good notes. The rest of my life and before that, I always had a very strong base in Hindustani semi-classical music. And as we all know, music and literature, those who love them would not have any bounds, would not work with borders. Both music and literature are so intertwined that they are not only ageless and timeless, but they are borderless also. And no, the person who knows Hindustani semi-classical music will never claim that I don't like Western music or the other way around. And when Jaideep came up with this proposal that we have Gillian Dooley, who is going to talk to us about Jane Austen, my first response was a great thrilling one. And when I came to know that it's going to be on music, my joys doubled. And today we see that this event took place, and I'm so happy, so thrilled to welcome each one of you, where music and literature are going to meet their ends, and they're going to be with one another, and we all are going to enjoy something which is very, very exotic, not only lecture, but some audio music, which is really going to make this event colorful. I wanted to talk a lot, but I want to listen to Gillian more. And whenever I listen to Rabindra Sangeet or to Bryan Adams for that matter, I feel that music and text both are incomplete without each other. And with this message, I request Vinita to take the program further. Thank you, everyone. Happy viewing, happy listening, and happy enjoying music.
Thank you so much, ma'am, for the welcome address. In the month of June, we had successfully conducted an international webinar, which was titled Poetry for the Fractured World, with well-renowned poets Arundhati Subramaniam and Professor Bashabi Fraser. And Dr. Joydeep Sarangi, he played a key role in moderating the entire session for us, and it was a very fruitful and insightful one. We are very delighted to collaborate with Dr. Joydeep Sarangi and his college once again. So, Dr. Jaideep Sarangi is a poet, bilingual writer, critic, comedian, editor, interviewer, translator, and also the principal of New Alipore College, Kolkata. I would now like to invite Dr. Jaideep to enlighten us on the theme of the event.
Thank you. Very good afternoon and maybe good evening to Gillian. I think it's approaching night in Adelaide. It's a matter of prestige and privilege for New Alipore College to be associated with the great college, Maniben Nanavati Women's College in Mumbai, which is one of the premier colleges in Mumbai. Thank you, Dr. Rajesh Trivedi, translator, critic, poet, fiction writer, and editor, and all faculty members of English and IQAC coordinator of the college for collaborating with us and giving it a reality. I thank the Department of English at New Alipore College, IQAC New Alipore College, and everyone instrumental in shaping of this particular event. Gillian Dooley is a long time friend of mine, and Gillian was a scholar of great Indian scholar, I would say, Sid Harricks, who was a professor from Tasmania, but was in Flinders University for a long time. And he was instrumental in shaping up Indian literatures in English in India and abroad, because in 1970s, 80s, and 90s, Sid Harricks hosted many Indian academicians and almost all great writers like Kamla Das, Malkarajanan, Raja Rao, who is not here in the list. So Sid Harricks is one of the champion critics of Indian writing in English. Indian writing in English is so vibrant, so visible these days, I think is one of the major contribution by Sid Harricks. And Gillian worked under the supervision of PhD under Sid Harricks. My pronouns and regards to that great soul, Sid Harricks, and of course, Gillian. Gillian used to edit a journal called Transnational Literature, which showcased writers from different backgrounds, translations from different backgrounds, translators, short stories, fictions, and I think with Mascara Literary Review, translational literature was one of the premier trans-border literature, critical review journals in Australia and inter Oceania. So it's a big hands to Gillian. She single-handedly used to publish, and still I think the last volume has come out, the Writers in Conversation, which showcased so many writers from different backgrounds of the world. I'm using the term different backgrounds in the world because which make an unique appeal to the audience in the West and also in different parts of the globe. So Gillian Dooley's contribution to world literature is enormous, unparalleled. But at the same time, I had the privilege of visiting Gillian's house and staying for a few days, and she took me to her concerts also. And that was a lifetime experience for me. And she was a devoted academician, a champion singer, and an involved editor, what one can expect from one person. So she is in all. That is brilliant. And I think she influenced a lot in many ways in life and manners. Thank you, Gillian, for accepting our offer. It's an honor for both the colleges. Thank you so much, Gillian. For today's talk, it is a truth universally acknowledged that Jane Austen enjoyed music. And Jane Austen had piano lessons until she was 21. And she played the piano every day, compiled her own albums of sheet music, and danced when others played. That's an amazing thing. Without music, Jane Austen wrote in Emma, which is one of the favorites of anyone. life would be a blank for me. Life would be a blank for me, quote unquote. So Jane Austen and music go together, and you cannot think of something better effectiveness than something called music. And Jane Austen, you know, how many of us in our adolescence have fallen in love with Amelia Woodhouse, or Emma Woodhouse, or Elizabeth Bennet. I think our first love in many times, of course, Emma or Elizabeth. That's brilliant. And the fascinating kind of atmosphere that we come across in Jane Austen's novels and Jane Austen's contribution to literature is just fascinating. So I think who better than Gillian can enlighten us in this afternoon about Jane Austen and music. And I thank all the participants who have registered for this very, very unique kind of talk and discourse, I will say. And it's all over to Gillian, and back to the anchor. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Joydeep sir. That was very, very enlightening. We did not know so much about Gillian ma'am. So yeah, we now move on to the most interesting part. This is all we've been waiting for. Am I right? So I would like to invite Dr. Neela Sarkar, Faculty of New Alipore College, Kolkata, to introduce our guest speaker for this evening, Dr. Gillian Dooley.
Please unmute.
I have unmute. Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Okay. Good evening, everybody. It is indeed my privilege to introduce Professor Gillian Dooley. Professor Sarangi has already said a lot about her, and but anyway, formalities need to be done. Professor Gillian Dooley is Honorary Senior Research Fellow in English Literature at Flinders University, South Australia, and a visiting fellow in music at Southampton University. Her research interests include the work of Iris Murdoch, V.S. Naipaul, J.M. Coetzee, as well as the life and works of Matthew Flinders. She has published widely on various literary and historical topics. She also has a particular interest in Jane Austen, often with an emphasis on music in her novels and her world. She was co-convener of the Immortal Austen Conference in Adelaide in July 2017. As a singer, she has been curating and presenting programs of music from Jane Austen's personal collection since 2007. One of her ongoing projects is creating a detailed index of each of the 500 to 600 items in the Jane Austen music collection. So Professor Dooley's work is indeed very unique, and we look forward to this talk, which promises to be not only very different, but also we are looking forward to a very melodious and a mellifluous evening. Over to you.
So I start now, do I? Thank you all so much for being here, and thank you for inviting me to give this talk. It's wonderful to be to have so many people listening to my little talk about Jane Austen and music. Could we share the screen with my slideshow now? Is that all right? Okay, so that's the title, the main title of my talk: Capacity and Taste and Application and Elegance. And we'll get to the significance of that quote a little bit later on. In her surviving letters, Jane Austen mentions music occasionally among news of friends, neighbours and family. We know that she played the piano and sang, practicing regularly, but we only have opinions of relations who were still young when she died to tell us how accomplished a musician she was. There is rich but inconclusive evidence in the surviving music books from the collection of Austen and her family circle. In any event, we know that music played a part in Austen's life. Her letters reveal a dislike for public concerts, appreciation of people who are honest about their lack of musical taste, and sometimes a genuine enjoyment of a superior performance, what she would call a superior performance. Some of these attitudes are also displayed in the novels, but there are subtleties and ambiguities in the way she uses music and musicianship to illuminate the characters, sharpening in various ways the difference between them, and adding extra facets to her portraits of young women in that crucial time of their lives just before marriage. So this talk will be in two parts. In the second section, I will discuss the Austen family music collections, particularly the music manuscripts in Jane Austen's own handwriting, and I'll give you some idea of the music that she played and sang. But firstly, I will talk about the way Austen uses music and musicianship in her most famous novel, Pride and Prejudice, and how it illuminates and doesn't define her characters. Music is, of course, only one of the many aspects which could be examined in this way. Similar treatment could be given to other accomplishments like painting or needlework, or reading or love of nature, landscapes, you know, all these things. The possibilities are many. But I think, as Rajshri mentioned, you know, there is music in the prose as well. So I think, you know, I think music is particularly close to a writer's sort of way of expressing themselves. And the particular interest of music for me is a personal one. My attention was drawn to it initially by the way that it's used in Pride and Prejudice to set off the character and personality of Elizabeth Bennet against her sister Mary, with her hard-won but graceless accomplishments. I began to see then that musicianship is a common thread in all the novels, except perhaps one, and although it is used differently in each novel. The exception, of course, is Northanger Abbey. It's significant that Catherine has no accomplishments in that novel, as it sets her apart from the conventional heroines of fiction. She's not compared to another character who is a musician, like Fanny Price, for example, or Eleanor Dashwood. And music itself plays no part in the action of that novel or the daily life of its characters, really. In Sense and Sensibility, it's in the context of differing tastes that Eleanor is often distinct from her sister Marianne, and it's her lack of affectation which sets her apart from many of the other characters in the novel. In Mansfield Park, we see the place of accomplishments in the education of young women, and it's looked at closely and seriously. In Emma, where the heroine's restless consciousness is open to our view, it's interesting to think about the way she and other characters see music in their own lives, and the way Austen uses this to add a deeper insight to their beliefs about themselves and others. Persuasion illustrates particularly well the importance of playing music as a pleasure in itself. In the days before recording or broadcasting, music lovers would often have to make their own music, whether or not they gave pleasure to others. A sensitive, isolated woman like Anne Elliot needs musicianship to help her bear her solitude. Austen also uses it to set her apart from the commonplace characters around her. In Pride and Prejudice, music forms a part of the face that Elizabeth presents to the world, and the way she presents herself in public is highly significant in her world, where rivals compete for attention in the drawing rooms of the gentry. Now, Elizabeth Bennet is not a faultless heroine, and like Emma Woodhouse, she has much to learn. Critic Gillian Darcy Wood claims that in Austen, failure to meet the minimum terms of accomplishment is worse than their abuse. However, though like Emma, Elizabeth is an imperfect musician, her lack of diligence doesn't carry the moral charge of Emma's. This is perhaps because Elizabeth is more genuinely self-confident and less defensive than Emma. Comparison with Jane Fairfax make Emma self-conscious, and with her guilty conscience and uncomfortable feelings about Jane Fairfax, one cannot imagine her making a speech like this one of Elizabeth's. My fingers, said Elizabeth, do not move over this instrument in the masterly manner which I see so many women's do. They have not the same force or rapidity and do not produce the same expression. But then I have always supposed it to be my own fault, because I would not take the trouble of practicing. It is not that I do not believe my fingers as capable as any other woman's of superior execution. So Elizabeth's self-assurance is of course not always justified, but in this case it has the stamp of Darcy's assent and it seems of the author's approval. Darcy replies to Elizabeth's reproof. She's making an analogy between her piano playing and Darcy's social skills by smiling and saying, "You are perfectly right. You have employed your time much better." Elizabeth isn't blamed for failing to apply herself in her youth by anyone but Lady Catherine. Could we have the next slide, please? She has next slide, next, please. Oh. Okay, thank you. She has no Jane Fairfax to show her up, but she also doesn't have Emma's preeminent position in society with an undeserved reputation for accomplishments. The explicit contrast to her musical skills is provided by her sister Mary, the only other one of her sisters who plays, who devotes her life to accomplishments. It's implied to make up for the fact that she's not as pretty as her sisters. Mary's devotion to music and learning, to the study of thorough bass and human nature, is always represented as more or less worthless, perhaps reflecting the anxiety about moral worth of accomplishments, which is evident in the conduct literature of the late 18th century. Mary has worked hard for knowledge and accomplishments, so it seems unfair that she should be treated with such scorn. But something has gone wrong with Mary's education. Her motives are faulty, and that shows in the final product. Mary had neither genius nor taste, and though vanity had given her application, it had given her likewise a pedantic air and conceited manner, which would have injured a higher degree of excellence than she had reached. Elizabeth, easy and unaffected, had been listened to with much more pleasure, though not playing half so well. And she has used her time better by concentrating on learning to mix with people, as Darcy admits, rather than wasting her time on mere technical skills. Mary's problem, however, is not so much that she's applied herself to these accomplishments, but that she has not the intelligence to use the knowledge and skills she has acquired to her advantage. I think we can see that poor Mary is very self-conscious, and it's not really her fault. Austen's satirical treatment of Mary is perhaps slightly malicious, but in Pride and Prejudice, she isn't dealing with the questions of morality and education in the serious way that she later addresses these issues. We may pity Mary, but we are excused for not liking her. We're never called on to pity Caroline Bingley. With her, it's more a case of schadenfreude on the occasions where she is put at a disadvantage. She unites affectation with insincerity, shallowness, and a clumsy artfulness that always fails to impress everyone, including Darcy. For her and her sister, music is an ornament, a ladylike occupation for the drawing room when the gentlemen are present to be impressed. Even though it's never explicitly stated, the Bingley sisters only seem to perform to a male audience. When Jane is sick, they are not often absent from the sick room, as the gentlemen being out, they had in fact nothing to do elsewhere. Miss Bingley, as we can see later, cannot bring herself to read with any application, even to impress Mr. Darcy, and when he's not present, reading or any other worthwhile occupation isn't even thought of. Elizabeth, on the other hand, always has some work or a book to occupy her idle time, like the Dashwood girls in Sense and Sensibility. There's one occasion when the Bingley sisters are said to enjoy music. They solaced their wretchedness at Jane's illness by duets after supper. Can we have the next slide, please? Next slide. Can we listen to the track? Thank you. Oh, okay. So that was a duet that appears in one of Jane Austen's manuscript books, and I think it's a good sort of sample of the sort of song that perhaps the Bingley sisters might have sung. The standard of their performance isn't ever commented on. It's never said that whether they're good at singing and playing music. Presumably they had the normal, the typical young lady's education of the time, with all the attention on externals and none on the moral basis of behaviour. If they have nothing to do when the gentlemen are out practicing scales, practicing music doesn't seem to be on the agenda. So one wonders how Caroline Bingley manages to uphold her own ideal of the accomplished woman, one who has a thorough knowledge of music, singing, drawing, dancing, and the modern languages. And besides all this, she must possess a certain something in her air and her manner of walking, the tone of her voice, her address and expressions. This is surely meant as a direct boast that she herself embodies these qualities, as well as a hint of Georgiana Darcy's sister's superiority to Jane Bennet to discourage Elizabeth from seeing Bingley as a potential brother-in-law. Darcy agrees with Caroline, but adds to all this, she must yet add something more substantial in the improvement of her mind by extensive reading, implying not only Caroline's failure to attain his standard, but perhaps his own growing attraction to Elizabeth, who deflates them both with her forthright protest that I never saw such a woman, I never saw such capacity and taste and application and elegance as you described, united. That means united in one person. Pride and Prejudice can be seen, among other things, as a plea for the imperfections of a lively intelligence against the greater sins of thoughtless pursuit of pleasure embodied in Lydia, heartless insincerity in Caroline, and the affected dullness of Mary. Elizabeth's liveliness, although it misleads her at first into prejudice and pride in her fancied perceptiveness, combines with her other qualities of courage and fair-mindedness to win Darcy, as we know, in the end. She learns the lessons she needs to learn through applying her agile mind to self-examination and logical assessment of the facts, a process which would be beyond the capacity of most other characters in the novel. Even Jane, whose determination to think well of everybody, will continue to mislead her after Elizabeth's eyes are open to the real truth. Elizabeth's musicianship is part of her easy and unaffected personality. Twice she expresses reluctance to perform, firstly at the Lucases, where Charlotte invites her, and she responds, "You are a very strange creature by way of a friend, always wanting me to play and sing before anybody and everybody. If my vanity had taken a musical turn, you would have been invaluable. But as it is, I would really rather not sit down before those who must be in the habit of hearing the very best performers." Her modesty, whether sincere or not, is contrasted immediately afterwards with her sister's regrettable impatience for display. After a song or two, and before she could reply to the entreaties of several that she would sing again, this is Elizabeth, she was eagerly succeeded at the instrument by her sister Mary. Later, at Netherfield, Mr. Darcy applied to Miss Bingley and Elizabeth for the indulgence of some music. Miss Bingley moved with alacrity to the pianoforte, and after a polite request that Elizabeth would lead the way, which the other as politely and more earnestly negatived, she seated herself. Once again, her modesty is explicitly contrasted with another young woman impatient for display. Elizabeth's musicianship does, among other things, attract Darcy's attention and admiration. Witness the scene at Rosings when Elizabeth is playing and Darcy walks with his usual deliberation away from his talkative aunt and stations himself so as to command a full view of the fair performer's countenance. And that is certainly an aspect of its place in a young woman's life. But in this novel, music has a natural and unemphasized place in normal social life. And in Elizabeth's case, it is as much a part of her public presentation as her clothes or her conversation. As she is not vain about her appearance, she is not vain about her music. Vanity spoils Mary's performance, and the absence of vanity is an advantage to Elizabeth's. Elizabeth could be a better pianist if she practiced more, as Lady Catherine tactlessly pointed out, but her lack of application is not a flaw in her upbringing or her education or her moral character. Musicianship and musical taste are by no means constant indicators of moral intelligence in Austen's novels. Musicianship among the young female characters has such a variety of implications that they defy a brief summary. The very fact that Jane Fairfax, Marion Dashwood, and Mary Crawford are all excellent musicians, while being so vastly different in moral worth, maturity, and personality, demonstrates the incapacity of music to symbolize any moral value, positive or negative. We know that music played some part, as we've said, in Jane Austen's life, although her opinions and feelings on the subject are not clearly revealed in her letters. But music is neutral to Austen as an artist, whatever it may have meant to her personally. She never allows her prejudices to interfere with the needs of the storytelling task in hand, and this allows her to manipulate her narrative as she wishes, using music to illuminate her meaning rather than to symbolize or epitomize it. So among these 15 or more bound volumes of manuscript and printed music from the Austen family, which survive in Hampshire, some are at Chawton House and some are in private hands, belonging to in their hands of one of the descendants of the Austen family. But 3 of them are manuscript books written entirely in Jane Austen's handwriting. While it's uncertain how closely she was involved with the creation of some of the other books and to what extent she was familiar with their contents, the existence of these 3 manuscript books allows us to place Austen among the ranks of amateur musicians of her day, to whom music was not just a hobby, but an important resource for personal fulfillment. It shows that she was part of a wider network, widespread network of music distribution in Georgian England and beyond, and gives us some idea of the range of musical knowledge at the time, with composers who are now regarded as preeminent, not represented at all, while others who are now relatively obscure appearing more frequently. Almost all the music dates from the second half of the 18th century, and much of it is English, reflecting the tastes of the typical domestic music maker of the time. The Austen collections also show the usual patterns of music dissemination among amateur musicians at the time, with music copied by hand from print sources mixed with print music. Both manuscript and printed sheet music were often collected into bound volumes. Gillian Darcy Wood, once again, who's written about Jane Austen's music, says that the collection suggests that she was a fine amateur pianist. The most difficult of the sonatas in the Chawton books, if they were at Austen's command, would rank her among her own female characters, if not at the near professional excellence of Jane Fairfax, then certainly higher than Emma Woodhouse. Marianne Dashwood and Anne Elliot perhaps represent her own standard. And certainly there is a complete piano sonata by Joseph Haydn, which would be difficult to play really well. And so could we listen to that track, please?
Annabelle?
Should I play this?
Yeah.
Yes, please.
Yes.
This one?
Yeah. So that's part of the first movement of the Haydn sonata that is in Jane Austen's manuscript book, which is, you know, it's reasonably technically difficult to play really well. But there is quite a lot of music well within the abilities of a less skilled pianist within the music books. As was the usual practice in those days, most of the songs include the songs, not the piano pieces, include just the melody with a bass line, sometimes with numbers or figures to include the harmony, to indicate the harmony. Even amateur musicians were expected to learn figured bass or thorough bass, and that's what Mary was learning when she was learning thorough bass and human nature. So they could improvise a keyboard accompaniment from this outline. Could we have the next slide, please? Next slide. Oh, here we go. Thank you. So this is an example of the music that we have in one of the Jane Austen music books. On the left and on the right is a modern arrangement of it. Austen would almost have certainly had the skill of making an arrangement from this type of score, just being able to improvise an arrangement. Her niece Caroline wrote 50 years later, 50 years after she died, Aunt Jane began her day with music, for which I conclude she had a natural taste. She played very pretty tunes, I thought, and I liked to stand by her and listen to them. But the music, for I knew the books well in after years, would now be thought disgracefully easy. The piano virtuosi of the 19th century, you know, Franz Liszt and people like that, had their effect even on the domestic music making. So this earlier, more harmonically unadventurous, perhaps, music would seem in hindsight to lack sophistication. Whether Caroline would have been trained in thorough bass herself or even have been aware of it is an interesting question, because in the 19th century, the accompaniments to songs were more often composed completely rather than left to the variable abilities of the pianist. So this skill would have become redundant. Other similar collections of music from the 18th and 19th century are also available for study, and other evidence of music networks is available in contemporary diaries and letters. Such music networks are often regarded as peculiarly feminine, but there's also evidence that amateur musicianship was quite common among military men and naval officers, for example. It was May 2007 when I first put together a program from this repertoire at Flinders University Library, where I worked in for 27 years. That's in Adelaide, South Australia. And then in 2010, I was asked to perform at a gala dinner at the Jane Austen Festival in Bath. And not being acquainted with any accompanists in England, I resolved to practice hard at the piano and accompany myself. And of course, that would be what any reasonably accomplished young lady of Jane Austen's time would have been capable of. But by a great stroke of luck, there was another musician also invited to perform that night, Mike Parker, a London-based specialist in the historic harp. He heard me practicing before the dinner and suggested we perform one of the songs together so that I wouldn't have to accompany myself. Can we have the next slide, please? There we are. So there's Mike and me performing at the gala dinner in Bath. It was a really wonderful night, and Mike and I have remained friends ever since and have performed several times together as well when I've been over in the UK. And so then the next slide, there's an embedded video. Here we are. So this is a song that we sang together at at another concert in Bath 2 years later. Can we try and play the
and I've done my BA and
So that was a song called Captivity by Stephen Storris. It was, if you wondered why there wasn't anyone in the audience, it was actually a rehearsal track. We were just trying out beforehand. And Mike there is playing a harp from the period. So that is actually a harp that dates from Jane Austen's lifetime. And that song, Stephen Storace, that composer, he was an English composer, but he had worked in Vienna and he knew Mozart. He was one of Jane Austen's favourite composers. One of the composers who she had quite a few pieces of music by him. In fact, you know, there's not very much music at all by Mozart, and the music of Mozart that's in the collection isn't acknowledged as by Mozart, but there's lots of music by this composer. And it's a lament by Marie Antoinette, the Queen of France, of course, who was doomed. So it was written in 1793 when she was in prison in the Bastille after the French Revolution, before she was sent to the guillotine. So it's a very, very moving song, really, and a very historic moment in European history. The very next song in the book, in the manuscript book, is also about a doomed queen, and that is Mary, Queen of Scots. So of course that's back another, you know, few hundred years into the reign of Queen Elizabeth I. And here we are. Thank you very much for this is Jane Austen's manuscript of Queen Mary's Lamentation, it seems to me that she wrote them out together, side by side, on consecutive pages, because she probably thought of those two doomed women, doomed queens, in the same sort of way. Queen Mary's Lamentation is a traditional Scottish song, and in this manuscript book also, though, as well as the sort of royalists and the ones on behalf of the queens, we also have the famous Marseillaise, the what's become the French national anthem, which was of course a revolutionary song at the time. So Jane Austen wasn't just on the side of the monarchists or the revolutionaries. She had both these aspects of the music in her music book. There are several other marches as well as the Marseille March, which is what she calls the Marseillaise. The Duke of York's March is a rousing military piece, not to be confused with the Duke of York's New March, which is a brief piano arrangement of Mozart, a Mozart aria from The Marriage of Figaro. Both of these pieces appear in Austen's handwriting in one of these manuscript books, and neither was attributed to a composer. The Mozart was easy enough to identify. You just played it and you could understand what it was. But it took some detective work to find out that the other one was by someone called Matthew King and was published in 1793. So could we listen to the next, we have the next slide and listen to that march? Thank you. Why are we hearing it again? That's probably enough of the march. Can we go on to the next? I think we've probably. Thank you. We don't.
I'm obliged to beg my bread and had not where to lay my head. I'd creep way on the flocks of hair and steal a look at somebody. Oh, dear somebody, dear sweet somebody.
Okay, so that little song is called Somebody, and it was the only. This is in fact the only place where I've found this particular tune with these words. So I don't know. We don't think that Jane Austen actually composed any music, but sometimes we find sometimes I find something that it doesn't seem to be anywhere else. In any other library collections, at least, I haven't found another source for that tune. You know, we're not sure what's going on there, but we might well eventually find another source for that tune. I don't think she composed it. And often these songs, which were called Somebody, were about Bonnie Prince Charlie, the young pretender, but I'm not sure that's the case. It doesn't seem to fit these words, but who knows. There are many songs in the collection by Dr. Thomas Arne, very famous for writing Rule Britannia, and also songs like Where the Bee Sucks, the Shakespeare songs. Among the Austen manuscript, there's a really wonderful down-to-earth Scottish love song about a young woman managing her boyfriend into proposing. I think, can we try and listen to that one? The next slide, I think it is.
To ease his heart and on his flame, young jockey to my cottage came, and though I liked him passing well, I careless turned my spinning wheel. My milk-white hand he did extol, and praised my fingers long and small. Unusual joy my heart did feel, but still I turned my spinning wheel. Then round about my slender waist he clasped his arms and me embraced. To kiss my hand he doubted me, but still I turned my spinning wheel. With gentle voice I bid him rise. He blessed my neck, my lips, my eyes. My fondness I could scarce conceal, but still I turned my spinning wheel. Till Boulder grown so close he pressed, his long-time thought I quickly guessed. It pushed him from my rock and reel, and angry turned my spinning wheel. At last, when I began to chide, he swore he meant me for his bride. 'Twas then my love I did reveal, and flung away my spinning wheel.
So that's by Thomas Arne, but the next song is also by the same Dr. Thomas Arne, and it's a very different sort of song. It's an aria about from Milton's setting of Milton's Comus. So John Milton set by Thomas Arne. Can we try and listen to that one?
like sunny beams his golden hair. His voice was like a nightingale's, more sweet his breath than flowering vales. How hard such beauties to resign, and yet that cruel task is mine. On every hill, in every grove, along the margins of its stream, dear conscious scenes of former love, I mourn and demon is my theme. The hills, the groves, the streams remain, but demon still I seek in vain. The hills, the groves, the streams remain, but demon still I seek in vain.
So you can see that, there's quite a lot of different variety, among the music in her collections. So much of the music in the family collections is now out of print, and luckily the whole collection has now been digitized and is available online. If we can see the next slide, we can see so this is on the Internet Archive. It's very easy for you you can just type in Austen family music books and find all the music books digitized in full. I've put some transcripts of the music online as well, but I'm also working through all of these books, making an individual catalogue record for each single piece of music, so you'll be able to search them. You already can search a lot of them on the library catalogue at University of Southampton Library to find out what songs Jane Austen had in her collection, what pieces of music she had in her collection. The last song that I'll include, if I've got time, to do one more, is called The Song from Burns. She called it Song from Burns. It's both a love song and a fierce statement of Scottish nationalist fervour. It's with great excitement that the researchers noted there's a slight difference in Jane Austen's version of these lyrics. Aside from the occasional variation in spelling, the name Jean, which is Robert Burns's wife's name, is altered to Jane. And, we think, oh, goodness, does that mean that Jane Austen, however much she publicly might have disapproved of Robert Burns, she secretly admired him perhaps, but this actual version has been found in another young lady's manuscript book, and her name isn't Jane. So it's quite likely that there's a print source somewhere that we haven't found yet, that both manuscripts were copied from. So this is this song, Their Groves of Sweet Myrtle. If we can try and play that one too. Thank you.
Their groves of sweet myrtle let foreign lands reckon, where bright beaming summers exalt the perfume. Far dearer to me yon lone glen of green bracken, with the burn stealing under the long yellow broom. Far dearer to me are yon humble broom grass, where the garnet bluebell 'Tis the breeze in their gay sunny valleys, and cold Caledonia's blast on the way. Their sweet-scented woodlands that skirt the brown colours, what are they, the haunts of the torrent and sleigh? The slave's fancy forests and gold bubbling fountains, the brave Caledonian views with disdain. He wanders as free as the winds on the mountains, save love's willing fetters, the charms of his day.
So as you can hear, these are all live performances, so they're not always very polished, but they're just the way the song came out on the day when I performed them. And the next slide, if we can have a look at the next slide. This is a picture of me sitting at the piano in Jane Austen's house in Chawton. This is not probably her piano, but it's a piano from the time, from about 1810. It's the type of piano that she would have had, and they allow you to sit down there and play it, which is just wonderful. I've been to Chawton House several times since, sorry, the Jane Austen's House Museum, as well as Chawton House, which is a different building. And last year I actually gave a talk there, which was wonderful. It's always very exciting being able to visit her home and imagine her sitting in the same place, in the same building, doing her piano practice more than 200 years ago. So thank you all very much for listening, and do let me know if you have some questions. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Gillian. That was a very insightful session. I think all of us can agree to that we did not know this side of Jane Austen, that she also had a musical side, side to her. And I think now we'll move on to the Q&A session. We have received a lot of questions in the chat box. So I would like to invite Dr. Dhruba Jyoti Banerjee, Faculty of New Alipore College, Kolkata, to moderate this session. So could you please go ahead?
Thank you very much. Can you hear me? Hello?
Yeah, you are audible.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you, ma'am, for this beautiful session. We were all really enjoying ourselves, and they say that literary analysis takes away the beauty of a text, but if it is in some ways filled in with such beautiful pieces of music, then I believe that the beauty of a text is enhanced manifold. We really have questions, quite a few questions, but more than that, there are these notes of appreciation that you can see. All of our participants are really, really happy to be part of this beautiful session. So I will take some of these questions. So the first question is from our fellow participant, Sana Tabassum, and she says, hello, ma'am. How far do you think Jane Austen reflected the class distinction in her novels through musical allusions? Class distinctions and musical allusions.
Oh my goodness, that's a thesis. That's a PhD thesis. I think you should go away and write that PhD thesis. I'm not sure. I'm sure that happens because, for example, people who were there's a very it's. Do you remember that Jane Fairfax only had a forlorn old spinet to play on? So that meant that she was poor. People who can afford to buy a harp, like Mary Crawford and the Musgrove sisters in Persuasion, they are much better off. They're much richer because a harp would cost as much as, say, it would cost to employ a housemaid for a whole year. So a piano was not so expensive in those days. a small piano like the one that Jane Austen had, and probably most of her, you know, depending on which household we're talking about, Emma would have probably had a grand piano in her house because she was fairly rich. So these distinctions are certainly there. They're quite subtle, and it does take a little bit of historical background to know what they mean. Thank you for the question. It's a wonderful question.
Thank you, ma'am. The next question is from Rajshri, ma'am, and she asks, most of the music in Jane Austen comes from the classical style. Did she also play or appreciate local folk style in her music?
Yes, definitely. There were 2 of those songs were folk songs. Well, 3 of them actually. There wasn't such a big distinction. You know, they would set folk songs. Well, as in fact 20th century composers do as well. They would set folk songs to, you know, within a classical sort of setting. But that last song I sang was very much a folk song. The Thomas and Sally one, that's a folk song, and a Scottish folk song. A lot of the Scottish folk music was very, very popular. Scottish folk tunes, but they were often set to, you know, with piano or harp accompaniments, so that they were more like other drawing room music. They were made, you know, that, but you know, there was a very permeable boundary between folk music and classical music. Yes.
Thank you, ma'am. The other question comes from Pearl Banerjee, and the question is there any connection between Jane Austen's character or personality with all the songs, tunes, melody, rhythm, essence? Is there a connection between herself and the music that she uses? That is basically the question.
That's another PhD thesis in the making. So I think that's a very good topic to go off and research. However, I personally don't think, not with her personality, but I do think that there's a certain type of song that she seemed to like, a certain type of composer of songs particularly. One is, we didn't include any of his music today, but Charles Dibdin, who was a writer of very sort of theatre music, quite funny, humorous music, with a rather not particularly sort of refined sense of humour, and they're very sort of funny in a rather well, not, I don't want to say vulgar, but almost not very refined way, and she liked those songs, and you could see that she was sort of laughing along with them, and you could also, they were very well crafted songs, and I feel as though that she knew that those songs, and she sort of, if not was influenced by them, at least felt a kind of fellow feeling with another artist who was also good at making characters live.
The next question is by Dr. Samir, and he asks, the music that Jane Austen included in her works, what purpose did it serve? Is music an integral part of her works and adds to her novel's impact, or is it included only because of her love for music?
I think it's definitely included as part of the fabric of the works. It's used. It's never gratuitous. It's never just because she liked music that she made. And I think, in my first part where I was talking about Pride and Prejudice, the different musical characters in Pride and Prejudice, and how their musicianship shows a different side of different personalities. I think it's all very well integrated. I do have an article on that published in an Australian journal. If you wanted to look it up, I could perhaps share it with you, with everybody if you're interested, on each of the novels and how music is used by Jane Austen in those novels. Music and musicianship. Yeah.
Penelope Cave asks, she disliked hypocrisy in all things, including music and music appreciation. Probably why she disliked the artifice of Italian opera, perhaps. Could you comment on that, ma'am?
That's interesting, Penelope. I'm not convinced that she disliked the artifice of Italian opera. I think some kind of a sign of perhaps an amateur being a little bit pretentious. But she, there was a bit of Italian music among her music, certainly among her broader collection. Gee, that's a really interesting question, and I think the people who say that Italian, Harriet Smith says there's no understanding. I hate Italian music. There's no understanding a word of what they're singing. I'm sure we're not meant to agree with her there. Anne Elliot can, on the other hand, can translate the lyrics of the Italian songs to when Mr. Elliot asks her to. So I think once again, these things mean different things in different contexts.
Dr. Aparna Mukherjee asks, do you find appropriate incorporation of music in Jane Austen's works, or could she have used it better?
No, she couldn't do anything better. She was perfect. No, I think we can appreciate what she did, and I think music is beautifully used in the novels to, I mean, the only thing perhaps is, as I mentioned, that sometimes she's a little bit unfair to someone like Mary Bennet, saying, that she was vain about her music. Poor Mary. I do feel sorry for Mary Bennet. But when it comes to Mary Crawford, for example, I think it's fascinating. She's a fascinating character, and that novel is wonderful in Mansfield Park. And I think perhaps she did improve in her use of music and improve as a novelist. Even on Pride and Prejudice, she got better as she kept writing.
The next question asks, are the musical numbers reflecting the taste of 18th century England?
Yes. Yes, certainly. A lot of the music, these days we listen to music which goes right back to the 18th, the 17th, the 16th century. We listen to music, at least, I do, going way, way back, centuries back. In Jane Austen's time, that wasn't so common. She would know the music of, say, 50 years before, or perhaps a little bit more. The music of Handel, the very famous George Frederick Handel and Thomas Arne, they were sort of middle of the 18th century composers, but most of the music was quite recently written, from her lifetime, really. Most of the music that she had was written during her lifetime. And I think that, that was more the pattern at the time, that they would more appreciate the music of the day rather than to go back. Of course, they didn't have recordings, so you would play music that was recent. You would hear it played in concert, and you would play it yourself. Yeah.
Well, someone else asks, was playing the piano considered an integral part of a woman's education in Jane Austen's time?
It certainly was, well, of that class. So, you know, there were many, of course, there were many women who weren't born to families that were rich enough to afford pianos and piano lessons. You know, this even though Jane Austen was not particularly rich, she was still of a certain class. She was the daughter of a country clergyman, so she would have been sort of minor gentry, I suppose you might say. So she was sort of lower middle class. She wasn't aristocracy, but she didn't have to work for a living, you know, to go be a servant or anything like that. So there was a whole lot of other women and men in sort of lower down in the social scale. But for her class, some sort of accomplishments. That quote from Pride and Prejudice about, you know, that Caroline Bingley says that she must know music, dancing, drawing, singing, and all the modern languages. That's almost impossible. You know, usually we can see in Austen that a woman would have perhaps one or two accomplishments. You know, they would be good at drawing, or they would be good at music, or you don't find that many of these women were writers, though, which is interesting, because of course Jane Austen was primarily really a writer, and she doesn't have any characters in her novels who write poetry even, or so, which is an interesting fact, isn't it? Yes, thank you.
Another participant, Donna, asks, are there only arias and solos in the manuscript, or are there any choral music too? Is there any evidence of Jane Austen being in any choir?
No, not. There's not really evidence that she was in a choir. There is some parts. There are some part songs, so music that would be sung by 2, 3, or 4 people. So duets, like the one that we played first up. That was a duet. There are some glees, which are part songs of the time, but there's not much music which is really you think of as choral music. Not very much at all. No. So perhaps I don't know. I don't know that there was a church choir tradition in that time, and whether in fact women would have been in the church choir anyway. It was usually that she might have done. That's sad, really, because it's such a joy to sing in a choir, isn't it?
Thank you, ma'am. I am told that some of our students are interested in asking Professor Dooley some questions. So I would invite our students to come in one by one and not place questions in the chat box, but please ask ma'am one by one. Please unmute yourself and ask questions if you have any.
Gillian, there is actually a lot of curiosity and inquisitiveness I find among the students, because Jane Austen has always been a very popular writer among the young, this young generation between 18 and 25. So there are questions coming and pouring in like rains in Mumbai. Yeah, are there any students?
Hi, ma'am.
May I be excused for 1 minute?
Yeah, please do.
I will be back in 1 minute. I just need to get some more water. Sorry. Just got some water. Thank you very much. So, do we have a question?
Yes, ma'am. Hi,
Hi.
this is Kushi, and I wanted to ask if, like, the music they listen to, like, did it also speak up, like, more about their personal, like, individuality, like who they are in person?
I'm not quite sure. Sorry, could you say that again?
Yeah. So I wanted to ask that does the music like they listen to, like the characters you were talking about in beginning, does the music they listen to also speak more about their personality?
Ah, okay. So with the characters in the novels, we don't know. Jane Austen only mentioned one piece of music and one composer in Emma. She didn't ever mention what music the people were playing or singing. She just said, you know, she might have sat at the piano and played some Scottish dances or sang an Italian aria or something like that. But she never actually says what the music is exactly. So it's hard to know. You can sort of imagine yourself, especially once you know the music collection, you can start thinking, oh well, this is perhaps one of the pieces that she might have been thinking of at that time, you know, when she wrote that. But it's all you know, we don't know for sure. So we can speculate, but we can't really know that.
Okay. And another question I wanted to ask was, other than piano, did they play any other instrument?
Well, the harp. So if you were rich, you could play the harp because they were very expensive. And a little bit earlier, they would play the harpsichord, which was a different, a bit like a piano, but a different sort of action, a different sound. It's most typically that women would play those the harp or the piano. Sometimes you know, other popular instruments of the time would be the violin or the flute, but they tended to be more played by men than women for various reasons of sort of modesty and decorum and that sort of thing. So that's that's as far, you know, that's the sort of music history.
Okay, so was like the music only for the royalties, like of that time?
Sorry?
Was the music like only for the royalties of that time, like, or did the lower class and middle class also get the taste of it?
Oh, you mean music
Yeah,
concerts and
like who was allowed to, listen to music, or like it was for everyone in general?
it wasn't. Yes, so there were public concerts. It wasn't like I mean, there were places earlier in the 18th century where music was only able to be heard by the sort of, if you were in the court, or you know that. But if you were in London, there was a lot of public music going on, music in the theatre, music in churches, of course. The music in churches is a very big in the Anglican Church is a very big long standing tradition. And of course, making music oneself, you know, and music made by your friends and by people you socialized with was a very common way of enjoying music at the time.
In the market squares and all those public places, I think there was this tradition of 3 or 4 people coming together and playing and earning a little money out of that. Was it so?
Look, I don't know so much about that. Certainly much earlier, you know, the troubadours and in the medieval times and the miracle plays and all that sort of thing. There probably was that sort of public music making in the streets. There was ballad singing, and so there was a lot of political ballad singing, and there's a lot of use of music for political purposes to encourage sailors to join the navy, to whip up, you know, sentiment, because England was at war, Britain was at war with France and other countries almost all the way through the 18th century. So they, you know, there was sort of music as propaganda in quite a lot of for quite a lot of that time, yes, and then some of that music also made its way into Austen's collection. Yes.
Thank you so much.
We also have a question from our Facebook Live. It's by Shubha. Do you think the movie Pride and Prejudice did justice to Jane Austen's novel, music-wise, and also the novel as a whole?
Which movie? There are a few movies. Well, I mean, I think the novel and the film and the novels and films are completely different genres. So I don't feel that a film, you know, it's really fair to say whether a film does justice to a novel, because they're such different genres. A film has to make something new out of a novel. Otherwise, it doesn't. You know, it's a new work of art, really. But as to music in the films, some of it is well done, and some of it's it's not always. You know, it would be good in a way if each the musical staff on each film were to know the music collection, Jane Austen's music collection, very well and draw on it when they're making the film. They haven't always done that, but you know, sometimes the film might need another type of music, and that's all right, because film is a different thing from the novel, I think.
Thank you, ma'am. We have another question from one of our students, Sadia Barudkar. So she would just like to ask you one question. Sadia, could you please go ahead?
Ma'am, I just wanted to ask, did she compose any music on any of her lover or Tom Lefroy?
Sorry?
I mean, did she compose any music on any of her lover or Tom Lefroy?
She didn't compose any music at all. All this music, as far as we know, was copied, or, you know, was music that other people had written. So none of this music was composed by Jane Austen. She didn't invent this music. She was copying music and playing it. So she was making she was using other people's music, as we all do, you know, these days as well. So she wasn't a composer of music. She was a great novelist. Certainly, you can see, you know, that there's a song about an Irishman and what a great lover an Irishman is in the collection. And you might think, well, you know, maybe she put that in. She thought that was funny and put it in her book because of Tom Lefroy. Who knows? But of course, there are many love songs, because most songs are love songs. There are many love songs in the collection, but we don't know that any of them had a personal connection for her.
Thank you so much, ma'am.
We don't have that many questions. So I think we'll move on with the session. Thank you so much, Dr. Banerjee, Dhruba Jyoti Banerjee, sorry, excuse me, for moderating this Q&A session. I'm sure everyone has got their questions answered, and it was a very insightful session. We've been getting a lot of comments in the chat box. We move on to the last part of the session, and I would like to invite Miss Annabelle Ribello, Assistant Professor at the Department of English, Maniben Nanavati Women's College, to deliver the vote of thanks.
Good evening. I hope I'm audible, Venita. Okay. It's always sad when good things come to an end, but it would be incomplete without formally proposing the vote of thanks. I begin by thanking Dr. Gillian Dooley, Honorary Senior Research Fellow at Flinders University, for so gracefully introducing us to Jane Austen. I think you have made us fall in love with the author once again, and it felt so soothing and calm to the mind, especially during the lockdown, and it has filled us with so much of positivity. I can say you have truly musically and magically enriched us.
Yes.
Next, I would like to thank Dr. Jaideep Sarangi, Principal of New Alipore College, Kolkata, and the faculty, Dr. Neela Sarkar, Dr. Dhruba Jyoti Banerjee, for leading the session today. I'm grateful to Dr. Rajashri Trivedi, Principal of Maniben Nanavati Women's College, for being the backbone of this webinar and giving it great direction. Next, I would like to extend my heartfelt thanks to Ms. Venita Rodriguez for cheerfully anchoring the webinar today. You did great. And to Susan Asokan and Ms. Aisha Khan for making sure our webinar was free from technical glitches and streaming it live on Facebook. And finally, I would like to thank each and every one of you for tuning in today on a lovely Saturday, whether evening or morning for you. Without your active participation, this would never have been possible. We look forward to seeing you at our future endeavors. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Rajashri, and thank you, Gillian. Thank you, Gillian. Yeah, it was wonderful session. Thank you so much.
Thank
you, Jaideep.
and everything.
Thank you.
Everyone